Okay, so what we've got here is a image that we're going to make a tricolor gum over Palladium, and it's been sent to me size. It's ready to go. It's the way the artist wants to see this image. As you can see on the right hand side, we have the tools that I use. I use the channels, I use the history, I use the toolbox, layer palette, and the info palette regularly. So first thing we do is we understand that the pigments that we're going to use create the color palette, not what you see on the screen. If you expect to see what's on the screen to come into the pigments, then I think that you're going to be very disappointed trying to do this type of work, because there's no way what you see on the screen is going to come out with the various pigments we use mixed on top of Palladium. So it's a subjective process after you start working on the film, and then the pigments take over, and then the amount of wash time and stuff that you do in the printing stage create the color. I have standard colors I use that I prefer, and that this whole body of work has been done with these standard colors. We use a yellow pigment, we use a magenta pigment, and we use a cyan pigment. The cyan is created with two colors, blue and green, of equal amounts, which do equal cyan. The yellow is, and all of the pigments are transparent, watercolor based, of series 1 light fastness, and there's 4 or 5 to maybe 10 or 15 different manufacturers worldwide that can supply you these pigments. So you must understand every paper, every color will be different, so therefore it's impossible for you to expect to match, but you can get an interpretation of what we have here. So the first stage is to make this. We size it. We know that the image size, we double check, is 12 inches. That's the width of this print, going to be 12 inches. And I need to put registration marks and stuff around it, so I create a canvas, and which will be my film size. So I go 16 inches on the width, so I'm giving myself bleed on either side, and I'm going to go 13 on the height. I'm going to put a black border around, and there it is right there. So I can reduce that a bit. Now the next stage is to put the separate the registration numbers in, so that we have something to register with. Some artists don't use registration. It's whatever you're comfortable. This is what I'm comfortable with. So I drag from the internet some registration marks that are on my desktop, and I place them into position. And so now I'm just going to put them up into the outside edges of the film, and I do this so that you have to do this on this positive, because if you don't do this now, everything will not register in the future once you start separating the film. So this is the most important first step. So there we have them in place, and you'll see over here that the layers are there, and we just flatten this. Okay, and you see the history is starting to show what we do. Now we're going to save this, so we're going to File, Save As, and this is important that you save as you go into a folder called Grand Canyon 1, and we're going to call this the positive. So the positive is there, we save, now we can start working. Okay, so the first step in a tricolor over Palladium is to make the base image or the Palladium image. So what I do is I make a layer, and I go image mode black and white, and I like this because you'll see why I like this. And basically I look through the filters, and it's generally either the default, the darker, or the green filter, and in this case it's the green. I like the green filter a lot, and I find that I use it most of the times. You may find it differently. It's your call as an artist, but this is what I find. So now I've got my basic conversion to black and white, and what I want to do now is think like in the old days when you were making black and white hand-colored photographs. You make the print, and you got to put color into regions, and if it's a dark region in the print, it just, the color going over top muddies up or isn't really vibrant color. So what we do here is we look at the image, and I can see down in here a lot of yellow. So I want that yellow to come up, so I'm going to go back into the black and white, click on the yellow, there it is, and I'm going to lighten it. Okay, so that's step one. So I go back to the preview again. I see that there's cyan in the water. It's an important element of this photograph. So I go back to black and white again, click into that area, and yep, sure enough, there's cyan, and I'm going to lighten that. Now, that's quite a bit, but we are going to put pure cyan back into that, and it'll look great. Now we preview again, and the other dominating color is what I can see is a magenta rift going all the way through this formation. So we go back into the black and white, we click on an area. I want to find the magenta. Wow. There we go. There's the magenta, and I'm going to lighten that area. You see how so basically all the areas of color that I want to come out in my print, the magenta, the cyan, and the yellow, I want to naturally come out. Now there is some green here, but green is made up of yellow and cyan, and when I click on the green areas, all I see is yellow. So I'm not going to massage this any further. So this is the basic conversion to black and white. I accept it, and I'm going to flatten it. Now, one thing I'd like to do is make it a bit contrasty so that in the black and white it just comes down and it creates all the detail that I need to see in this photograph. The color will just come in naturally. So we're going to make a layer here, and we're going to go into contrast, curves, and I'm going to tighten in the curve, and I'm going to raise it a bit, and I'm going to create a nice contrast. Now, that may be too much, and that's what the opacity slider is for. So at about 50%, I like what I see. That's too flat. That's got good punch. There's a lot of area for the color to come into those regions, the magenta, the cyan, and the yellow. I'm going to say I like that. Flatten it. Now, I'm going to sharpen this part of the image, the main detail. So I go into luminosity channel, and when I'm in an RGB, out of habit, I do that. I mean, it's a black and white image, but out of habit, I go to luminosity in the blending mode here. Go to sharpen, unsharp masking. These numbers, amount 500, radius 2, threshold 6, are long-standing numbers that I learned from Dan Margulis years back, and I find them to be correct. They look really chunky when you look at it right now, but that's what the opacity slider. So you bring the opacity down to taste. Over a few thousand images, I understand that 30% is what I like. So there we go. So now we have a sharpened black and white image. So the next stage, so we're ready to invert it and create a negative. But I think what we have to do is make sure that we put in the naming structure, because when you start doing this, you'll get confused with the negatives as they're coming off the printer. And by naming it on the film, you'll never be confused. And anybody working with you will not be confused. So Palladium is this name, merge that. And now it's in there. We're going to, next stage, we're going to invert the image, adjustments, invert. We've now created a negative, and we're going to flip it horizontal so that when the film gets finally stripped, we go emulsion down, right reading. So it's just a way of making sure that the emulsion is always face down on the paper. And we go File, Save As, and we call this Palladium. And that is saved as a TIFF, and then we're okay. Okay, so now we accept that, so the one neg's done. Now, here's the beauty of the history. We can go back above the black and white conversion to the original color, which is up here at duplicate. So we're way down here, right? But we can go back through all the stages up to duplicate layer after we flatten the original, and there it is. And now we're ready to do the conversion to CMYK. Now, well, first step is to create it, put it into the CMYK profile, and there I use working CMYK US coded V2. There are many ways of doing this. This is the way I do it, and now we have the profile in CMYK. Sometimes when you do this, the color changes dramatically, but once again, remember, it's the pigments we're using that create the color, not what you see on the screen here. This is only the reference for where pigment will eventually end. So now we've got a CMYK, we want to separate the channels. So we go to the channels palette, and we split the channels, and it's a little triangle right here. It calls up this sidebar, split channels, and now the image has been split into 4, CMYK, or black. This is the black. We don't want this one because we've already got a beautiful black and white conversion that we've already done that has way more detail, way more contrast or ability to show the image. So we get rid of this K. This K means nothing. So we don't save it. So now, once again, it's now very mechanical. It's very repeatable. You can almost do this with actions, but because you have to name them. So yellow, and we flatten that. So we've named this one the yellow. We now have to go back into profile, convert to profile, to change it back to Adobe for the printer. This is only for the printer. We'll recognize this Adobe profile, right? So now we're still in the Adobe. We're in Adobe now. And I don't know if that confuses people, but you have to go back to whatever the printing profile for the printer is. Nothing has changed in the image here, just the designation of the profile. So here we have it labeled. It's the yellow. So it's really dark here, so I know a lot of yellow is going to come when I invert this. So we image, go to invert. There's the negative. You see that it's going to allow a lot of yellow into these areas, but not up here. We're going to flip horizontal. You see that all the registration marks are in the same place, and then we file Save As, and we call this one the yellow .tiff. And there's one, and we do the exact same thing for the magenta. So this is the magenta. We're going to merge the type into place. I encourage people to put the name in. Edit, convert to profile, Adobe, there we go. Now we want to invert the image to make it a negative. There it's flipped. You can see that areas are going to block out there. The water's going to stay blocked out, but all this is going to allow some magenta and the yellow and the palladium to create the earth content. And then we want to flip this one horizontal. And there we go, flip horizontal, and we're going to file, save as, and we're going to call this magenta.tiff, and we're going to save. Okay, and the last one will be the cyan. And this is funny. As you do more and more of these things, you'll realize what are dominant colors, and you'll be surprised that the red content in our life is really dominant. Okay, really dominant. So look how detailed that cyan is. That's almost impossible to decide which one is the palladium neg or which one is the cyan. So this is why you want to name them, because that's a pretty detailed image. So we call that cyan. We're going to flatten, merge down. We're going to create the profile. Adobe, there it is. You double check everything. Adjustments, invert, turn it into a negative. There it is. And you can see it's a beautiful looking negative. And then you can flip image, flip horizontal. And there you go. File, save as. And now you have your cyan image. Now remember, you have to put all these into into one folder and name each folder, because otherwise you can figure out that eventually you're going to have a lot of. So I've got Grand Canyon 1 here, as you can see. Still got to do all these images for this show I'm working on, but that's just one image there. So we put the camera raw image into Grand Canyon 1, and all of these are going to be being done in the next couple of weeks. But this is our folder for Grand Canyon 1. We've got the cyan, we've got the original image, we've got magenta, palladium, positive. So I'm going to open what we did: cyan, magenta, palladium, positive, and the yellow. We open them up just as a final check. See the play? Okay, so there's the original positive. Okay, so original positive looks beautiful. That's the vision that the artist has. That's what she wants to show. These are by Monica Glitz, by the way. Monica has been working with me for a few years, and this is the third new body of work that she's done. These are all UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the show is coming up in July here in Toronto. I encourage you to check monicaglitz.com and see her work, because it's all done in this style of work. So this is the yellow, and you can see here that it's going to allow yellow into here, but it's not going to allow very much here. That's how a negative works: negative, positive. Okay. Here's the palladium. You can see there's lots of detail. You can see that it's sharp. Everything's here. The ridging of the cliffs, the atmospheric part at the top, the side cliffs, everything is here for this palladium. So that's going to be our first coating. Here's the magenta. Magenta's pretty strong. It's going to let in a lot of color, but it's almost all neutral gray, right? Which means it's about 50% of what we see is going to come through with magenta. You know, there's no real strong area, but you can see the water is blocked out completely, and that's because it wants to be cyan. It does not want any of this magenta color. So it's telling me there's nothing going to come in here, no matter what you want. It's not coming. And then here's the cyan, which is going to create much more color detail. So you know, that's the setup. And thank you very much.